For a few weeks I haven't produced a video because there's a topic that really drives me nuts and I'm thinking a lot about, which is like, why is drum and bass still a niche, and also why it will remain like this. At least this is what I believe, but also let me conclude why this is actually a good thing. What I have to do to talk about this topic is to start with a brief history of drum and bass, where its roots are coming from. And if you know so already, that's good for you, but just let me start there. So drum and bass has evolved from hardcore and jungle music and also having taken over their DIY ethos, right? So, and drum and bass evolved in the 1990s in the UK underground dance and rave scene. And those genres go hand in hand with the evolution of drum and bass as we know it today. So hardcore music, right, was very often characterized by its fast BPM, the chopped up breakbeats and euphoric synths, and was made music basically for raves, where the energy crowd demanded intensity and innovation. Also remember, this was the time when producers actually could make music in their bedroom with the effort and the advent of samplers and synthesizers that have become cheaper and cheaper in that time as well. It was jungle actually which added complex breakbeats, of course heavily influenced by the aim and break, reggae bass lines, dancehall MC culture, and this whole genre reflected this whole multicultural idea of the UK at that time. Also there was this rebellious spirit, so very often this underground culture was used and combined with these illegal raves and the pirate stations I talk about in a second. And those venues happened outside of the mainstream, right? So then there was the emergence of drum and bass, and by the mid of 1990s, Ronnie Size, LTJ Bukem, you name it, and many others refined the genre and added atmospheric pads, interesting drum patterns, and deep bass lines. In parallel, this whole scene grew and independent labels like Moving Shadow, Metalheads and so on started to establish themselves and were embracing this ethos of independent music creation. Still, the genre was tied to small clubs, small radio stations, tape swapping amongst fans and DJs. Just like many predecessors and other genres in the beginning, drum and bass skeptical of commercial success and prioritizing artistry over commercial success. So the music was kept raw and experimental. It was that time, if not even until today, that drum and bass very often is associated with dark clubs, not many lights, or at least minimal lighting, and a focus on the sound system. Talking about the sound itself, it was the time of these pirate radio stations in the UK especially that brought this sound to a broader audience. Basically the accessibility of underground music could interface to a broader audience because of these pirate radio stations. So you had Cool FM, Rinse FM and others that actually tried to ignore the mainstream sound of that time, like from BBC radio stations. And these stations allowed a niche and emerging sound to reach fans who couldn't access this music elsewhere so far. And very often these DJs were spinning unreleased records and white labels and tracks that were just not released, which kept the whole thing interesting. Because of that, these radio stations, these pirate stations, created a kind of feeling of community. You wanted or you did not want to belong to this kind of sound and everything that was coming from this ethos of this music. Also, once you're in the drum and bass scene and releasing music, very fast you realize that this whole business works differently than other genres. Very often these labels give you completely freedom of how you develop your music. Either you fit to the sound or not, and very often, me included, artists are on different labels, which is just not a problem. While in the pop business, for example, it's just like that you're tied to or you're focusing on one specific label and this is where you make your career of. Or maybe you switch your labels, but that's not really the case in the drum and bass scene. So this is the one aspect I was talking about, this underground aspect or historical aspect. But there's a second one, which is, I would call it the sonic complexity and accessibility topic itself. Drum and bass itself is quite multifaceted, right? So it's a combination of fast tempos, complex breakbeats, heavy bass lines, atmospheric melodies and everything in between, which are things that you not very often have in pop music, where the focus is just on different aspects of music. But let's start first things first, and let's start with the most obvious one, which is of course the fast tempo. So usually drum and bass ranges between 160 and 180 beats per minute. It's just like creates a kind of urgency and intensity, which is just not so common for regular listeners. So regular BPMs, like from hip hop to normal pop music, ranges from, I would say, 90 to 140 BPM, something like this. Hand in hand with these fast tempos, complex breakbeats go hand in hand, like with the amen break, and we producers very often chop them up to interesting but also complex patterns, which is not a common thing if you listen to a normal drum player, for example, if you're not in a jazz business, by the way, but still it's not a common thing in pop music. From drum and bass, talking about the drums, you also have the aspect of bass, so very often heavy bass lines are very strong and in the focus of the track itself. These bass lines very often are the emotional core of a drum and bass tracks. This is something we should not forget to. On top of these drum and the bass, of course, very often you add melodic parts or at least atmospheric soundscapes. That's why you're here on my atmospheric drum and bass music channel, right? Nevertheless, it's just not such a common thing that the focus itself of the maybe melodies or the effects that we're creating are so strong in the focus. Like usually you have vocals or a pop singer or somebody's dancing, right? And you have also a quite straight structure of the song, like intro, chorus, verse, etc. This is something that you don't very often have in drum and bass tracks. Like they are made for the club and they are made for maybe the listener, or the perception should happen in the background, like when you're focused on doing things, for example, working on the computer or you're driving and so on. And then a lot of people appreciate not having so many vocals, for example, but rather they want to focus on the sound experience itself.
Ease yourself back into consciousness.
One has to say that drum and bass is not just drum and bass, right? I guess most of my listeners or viewers know this, but of course, have in mind this subgenre diversity that you have around. For example, you cannot compare Neurofunk to liquid drum and bass or tech step, for example. Of course, there are some things that are in common sense, like the tempo, for example, maybe some break beats as well. But it's basically just the roots, but all these genres sound completely differently, at least in my opinion. So it's also not easy for someone who's not new to this genre of drum and bass to get into this drum and bass. On the other hand, you have liquid funk drum and bass, which tries to avoid and mitigate some of these aspects. You have more simple or simpler drum patterns. Also, the focus is more on the melodies, especially also adding a lot of vocals, right? So we have DJ Marky, for example, and this whole Brazilian drum and bass scene, which try to bring this genre really to a bigger audience. And I think they have done a pretty good job in the last 20 years for this one. Still, because of this underground culture, you have to imagine that there seems to be a kind of exclusivity in this kind of scene. So you have to get or gain a kind of knowledge, and it's not easy to get into there. And I remember my time when I started to dig into drum and bass deeper to learn what I like and what I do not like. It was really not so easy to get into there. And I actually believe that with other genres, especially in electronic dance music, it's really easier. So whom from the outsiders know what an amen break is, or neuro, or what is a roller, right? Those are terms, this is just like common in the scene, but not really common if I talk to anybody on the street or even in another music genre. However, there are solutions to this problem, which is playlists and YouTube playlists, Spotify playlists, and curated DJ playlists. Once you know, okay, or you follow a DJ, or like my playlist, for example, on Spotify, you actually find a pretty good guide for the style of music you like. In my case, it's atmospheric drum and bass. But I believe that the past used to be labels and maybe DJs or radio stations that were foster a kind of sound. But on the other hand, these days, they resulted into channels. So, right? A channel is something abstract, like a YouTube channel, a Spotify playlist, for example, or a DJ. But in the end, a channel is something you as a listener can follow and you can vote up for. And these channels can have an amplifying effect for its content. And this whole idea is not new. So it used to be in the past the radio stations and the DJs. but now it's the internet with all the social media that you have around, and that helps you to find your kind of sound as well. The whole cultural factor and perception. So drum and bass is still acknowledged as a subcultural scene, right? On the one hand, this might be nice, and creativity and expression from the artist and the producers have a quite high priority, but on the other hand, this can also limit a broader appeal to outsiders. So just if you think of the scenes and the usual places where drum and bass you can hear to, which is not the headphone but outside, these dark clubs and that are not so common to go to, or maybe very often in cities you have to know where to go to. It can also be a barrier for new listeners to get into this music. I'm not very often went to a festival in my life, to be honest, but also just if I look up the lineup that you see on the current festivals, drum and bass very often is quite of underrepresented compared to any other genres. So maybe there here and there some exceptions, like if you have Pendulum, for example, or Subfocus playing on a festival. But those are really like the tip of the iceberg of what drum and bass actually offers. Also, if you think of the variety of sounds, there's this kind of regional stronghold. So drum and bass popularity very often is associated with the UK and Europe. However, also if I check my stats of my channel, also there seems to be a nice and interesting focus in the US, by the way. Nevertheless, when I speak with people from, I don't know, Israel, for example, just happened this week to me, they just don't know what drum and bass is. Or if I remember on the Philippines, I talked about I'm a drum and bass producer. They look like to me if I'm an alien and doing whatever weird stuff. They have no clue what electronic dance music was, for example, because in their opinion, everything is electronic, right? So, and drum and bass even is a crazier niche that they just haven't heard of. And unlike house or techno or electronic music in general, drum and bass very often is kind of limited in any media representation, like if you check TV shows. So it's not really common, and still results into the fact that drum and bass stays a subcultural thing. I don't want to dig deeper into any misconceptions of drum and bass and everything. So for example, if we talk about drugs, so outside people very often associate maybe drum and bass with drugs, but to be honest, I think this you can associate with any music culture you might have. So this is not just a thing that is related to drum and bass, in my opinion. And then also there is this misconception or misunderstanding of a kind of negativity, yeah, because of this like maybe raw and rough sounds and these crazy bass lines that here and there you might hear. People think this is associated with a lot of negativity, but to be honest, if you compare it to heavy metal or I don't know what kind of many musics, very often it's associated with raw energy and a negative thing, right? On the other hand, if you ask me, if somebody's listened to, I don't know, popular artists like Christina Stürmer and I don't know what else is there, like this happy, kind, shiny, glossy music, I think that very often these people have something they have to hide in the basement. On the other hand, the people that listen to hardcore metal and like I said, drum and bass and rough techno, in my opinion, this is something where they express their soul into something positive thing. So very often these people are quite relaxed and harmless and also emotionally stable. At least this is my personal opinion. You can think what you want. Drop this in the comments if you think differently. So having said all this, what is the future of drum and bass, and will it be a niche genre like it is in the present, maybe also in the future? I believe yes, but I still believe that this is a good thing actually. So just summarizing, if you think drum and bass has evolved over 3 decades from this raw underground sound into a variety of subgenres, I believe that the evolution continues and goes on, because all these things what I just said you can also flip around. For example, it might not be very represented in commercial or TV shows or media itself, but on the other hand, I think every second TV show introduction or news introduction is focusing on a drum and bass beat. If I'm something like that, so don't take me by the numbers, but you get the point. Very often, also in background music or computer game music, for example, right? You have drum and bass tracks, and also computer games like Need for Speed and Unreal Tournament have made drum and bass popular, or if not also GTA. There are so many crossovers, and it's pretty easy because like half of the tempo you reside into hip hop. So these crossovers between different genres actually is already happening between jazz and drum and bass and hip hop and maybe other genres I'm maybe not aware of. But always these interactions, this is always what makes things interesting, and it's creating something new. Also, of course, the advance in technology, like if we just compare of how music was produced in the 90s, for example, and evolved over the 2000s to computers and digital audio workstations, now we get into the AI and other tools that we just cannot imagine. So I think it's pretty interesting times that we're living in, and we will see also an evolution of technology and things that are just possible we couldn't think of 5 years, 10 years back, for example. And also in recent years, like the last 10 years, platforms like Spotify, SoundCloud, you name it, back then it was also MySpace, it just revolutionized how we produce and exchange music. And also there we can, I believe that there not the last thing has happened, and that this DIY culture that is just so common in drum and bass will remain and will continue into further things we just cannot imagine right now. So this whole role of technology very often was going hand in hand with drum and bass, and the evolution of the producers and the labels. People are associated with being techy and adapting things quite fast. So that's why I think drum and bass is one of the most progressive genre if compared to anything else on this planet. So niche is not a bad thing. I believe it's a catalyst for artistic freedom and community and many other things to be creative rather than focusing on things to push into a corset of how you have to behave or how you have to make things like music. By staying outside of the mainstream, many things are possible you can just do in this genre, which are just not so common. And also this experimental sound design, I think it will evolve and will stay in the genre. You will have genres like liquid funk, for example, that of course will go more into this pop direction and with arrangements that people can follow easier. But on the other hand, I'm interested in also hearing a more experimental kinds of things where people start to create new kinds of genres and sound textures. And also if you think of the whole culture of drum and bass, I believe what I see is that people who listen to drum and bass or were on these events, they very strong feel connected to this genre. So it might not be that it's like the main music they listen to, but very often these people they will be fans of this genre for the next decades even. So they're very strong tied to the scene itself, right? Because they are the scene, of course. And all in all, what I just said and elaborated, this was a thing, I don't want to call it self-therapy to be honest, but this was a thing I was thinking of a lot in the just recent times, like why am I doing this? Of course, should I continue? Maybe I should produce, I don't know, dance music or maybe some country music. Maybe then I would be a little bit richer, but so far I think I'm doing this for this kind of music, and that's why I'm here. So that's why you see my combination of how I do things and how I produce music. This is what I show on my channel, but also I'm producing music. This is what I'm proud of, and I will continue always next to my job, next to the things I'm doing. And I hope you do so too. And let me know if I was missing something or think differently, then please drop me a comment. And of course, hit the like button, and talk to you soon. Bye.